Yeah. Okay.
Welcome to another edition of the Tini Lab Talks. Today, the topic for our talk is Jazz Dialogues, Roots, Worlds and Futures, better. Tini Lab Talks are brief informal talks between USA specialists invited by the University of Aveiro and researchers from the University of Aveiro itself through the American Corner program on topics such as technologies, innovation, research and culture. The conversations will usually take place at American Corner MediaLab with the support of the United States Embassy in Portugal. I want to give a warm welcome to both our guests today. I'm here joined by Philip Dizack, one of the most important jazz trumpeters of his generation. He teaches at the University of North Texas, but he has a long artistic career. As a leader, Dizack has released 3 albums. In 2019, Dizack joined Israeli-born pianist Shai Maestro's newly quartet. Dizack became a staple in New York, playing regularly with the bands of Melissa Aldana, Emmanuel Wilkins, Dinah Stephens, and many others. Philip has since been thrown in the limelight and is re-emerging as a fearless band leader and composer. Philip is currently touring and composing in preparation of his 4th album, and you can tell us a little bit more about this, set to be released in the spring of 2023. He is our international participant in Campus Jazz, the jazz festival of the University of Aveiro, conducting a masterclass, a workshop, joining schools' presentations, and presenting a concert tonight. Susana Sardo is a professor here at the University of Aveiro. She's an ethnomusicologist, and she's also the leader of our research center on music and dance, INET, Institute of Ethnomusicology. Besides that, she is also the director of our Jazz Studies Center here at the University in Aveiro, and she has been a promoter of jazz practices and studies and research here at Aveiro University. So I would start. I am Jorge Castro Ribeiro. I'm also a teacher of music field in musicology, ethnomusicology, and other stuff related to music. And now I would like to make some questions to our invitees. First, I would like to know, Philip, how is your 4th album? You have already all the music composed or arranged or thought?
Well, it's funny that you say that because I forgot until you read it out loud that I was planning that. So
it's written.
Yeah, and because it's written and now it's recorded, then I have no choice but to complete it. So that's the objective. I don't have very much of the music, if any of the music, written yet, but I have plans. It's long overdue. So that's kind of it's more of like it's about time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Put away the judgment and do the work to make sure.
Okay. You have already an idea for the title of the? Not yet.
Not the slightest idea.
You can add something related to Portugal.
I guess so.
I don't know. Are you enjoying your experience here in Portugal?
I have oval. What is it? What's the dessert?
Dessert, maybe ovos mãos?
Yes. Maybe I'll add that to the title. Yeah.
Okay. Aveiro, thanks you for sure. Now I will change to Susana Sardo and ask her to make a little view about the presence of jazz in Aveiro University. Is it okay for you?
Well,
the jazz in the University of Aveiro started with the donation of a collection of jazz by José Duarte. He is a very, very important enthusiast of jazz, and he was a very important role in broadcasting jazz during the dictatorship here in Portugal, where the jazz was not a very welcome music. So he was fighting for jazz in the radio and in the television also. And he collects a lot of discs, and he built a strong collection of jazz music. And in 2001, he decided to give to the University of Aveiro his collection, the entire collection. And so we received a lot of CDs, books, manuscripts of his radio programs and television also. A lot of pictures, photographs, and other stuff related with jazz. Some autographs from Louis Armstrong and all these icons from the American jazz, of course, and also the European jazz. So with this collection from José Duarte, we decided to create this jazz research center, which is connected with our library, because we have a lot of documents which belong to the library, and also with INETMD, the research center on ethnomusicology, which is responsible for the research carried out here related with jazz. That's why I'm connected with this. The research. I'm not a performer, a jazz performer. So, but I promote the research in jazz and also the kind of events related with jazz here in the university.
Okay. Now, Philip, I would like you to tell us something, or to tell us a little bit about your activity as a teacher in a university in North Texas, University of North Texas, and how does that activity of teaching, how does it connect to your artistic career?
Well, I was teaching private lessons or in different maybe master classes or clinics for many years, but this was the first time, starting 3 years ago, right before the pandemic, that I became a professor and had a different sort of responsibility to the student, because I see them for 4 years. I see some of them for 4 years, but I see all of them for a full semester, twice a week in the improv class, for example. So how it relates to I have a duty actually to continue my performance career and develop my performance career as a part of kind of my agreement with the university, because it's beneficial for everybody, of course. Mm. But I always figured that my performance career, and as it does, that it would help my students a lot. My ability to communicate with them in certain ways and share experiences, and it does that. I wasn't as prepared for how beneficial teaching would be to my performance career. If anything, I thought it might be more of a burden, like in terms of the time and energy that goes into that. But as it turns out, it forces me to kind of, as we were talking about like research before this talk, it forces me to investigate questions that I overlooked for myself. But I have students seeking very specific answers from me, and they're around me long enough that I have to figure out the answers, okay. Right? And so that's been beneficial for both teaching and also my performance career.
You do work only on trumpet, or also in combos and ensembles and so on? Yeah,
I do. Exactly what you said. So
okay.
I teach. Both, and I also teach an improv class focused on like advanced improvisation for all instruments.
Okay. So, in what concerns research, Susana, can you tell us something about the works or the research that are being done or has been done here at university? Can you tell us a little bit more about what was made here and what is being made now on research on jazz.
Well, because we are an university, we need to develop research and to have research results also related with jazz. But we need to teach also and to perform, because we have a degree in music, and the bachelor's on music is an open degree, so but especially focused on art music. And then on masters and PhD, students can choose to make their research on performance related with jazz, or in jazz studies, especially connected with ethnomusicological approach. Or we don't have African American studies here in Portugal, so the only path is to use the ethnomusicology as a framework for the jazz studies. So we have many students making research on performance related with jazz, so developing their career as a performers also in the framework of research or artistic research, or research using music as a path to produce new knowledge on jazz. We have students making research, for example, in our collections here, using the collections as sources for their research, or studying jazz in Portugal, for example, both for master and for PhD. So in our community here in the Department of Art and Communication, we have master degree in jazz and PhD in jazz, both in the path of performance and in jazz studies, we may say. So that's it. So,
but you would like to talk about some projects that have been developed about the jazz messengers?
Well, we had first in Portugal, we have to apply for funds in order to have projects to develop research in the universities connected with the research centers. And the first project that was competitive project that was funded to carry out research on jazz was here in the University of Aveiro. So we proposed, as we didn't have composers on jazz, and the jazz was not very much promoted during the dictatorship, the profession of jazz musician arrived very late in Portugal. So the jazz was living through the broadcast, through being broadcasted in the radios and in the television, very, very shine, we may say, and through the hands of these people like José Duarte and other promoters in Portugal, who made a very important job in order to put the jazz in our routines in Portugal and to putting Portuguese listening to the jazz. And so that's why the first project that we proposed, and we get funds for that, was called Jazz Messengers, because they were the jazz messengers. Of course, we are making here a joke with the jazz messengers, you certainly know, but the jazz messengers were 5. The one, we called him the Voice of America, because of the news that arrived in the newspapers here in Portugal related with the jazz, with the something very strange music that was made in America in the beginning of the 20th century. And the news were very strange, because some of them say that it is a very modern thing, and others say that it's a very dangerous thing, okay, for women and for the liberty of the bodies and so on. And then we have the fourth one, jazz messengers, Portuguese jazz messengers, Luís Vilas Boas, who created the first jazz club in Portugal, in Lisbon, the Hot Club, which is still there and in activity. And then Raul Calado, who created a very important jazz club, which was closed by the dictatorship and our secret policy at the time of the dictatorship. And then Manuel Jorge Veloso, who was a very important also jazz messenger, both in the radio and the television and even through the films, because he was also making films with jazz. And finally, José Duarte, who is the one who is still alive, and he's very important, ally of our work here. This was our first research project. We created a team to develop research about this. And then we have individual students making research and publishing books and articles and making performances. So we hope to be contributing for the development of the research in jazz and the performance in jazz in Portugal. That's why we create this campus jazz also, which is a kind of cherry in the top of the cake.
And now I move to Philip Dizack. At the University of North Texas, you do have some kind of research on jazz history and jazz criticism, or is it mainly focused on jazz practices?
Well, there's some roles that are, the primary role is, the primary role for the majority of the professors in the jazz division are performance-based. So many of the professors have just a master's, and some, including myself, only a bachelor's degree. And there's just a couple that have doctorates or PhDs. And so, because I think at least at that school, which I think is very smart of them, especially because we're in America and it's a part of the American culture and American history, is that they really value the real life practice of the music. And but they also value, there's avenues to funding and different types of study and research that they also value, so which is why they also kind of make sure that somebody who teaches theory or music history has a PhD. But I think there's a portion of that that sees like the kind of the work in action is a form of study that's highly valued, and I don't want to say more difficult to get it than a PhD because I've never gotten a PhD on purpose.
Okay.
But it's equally as challenging, and it requires a different set of skills and dedication that might overlap with kind of the research educational route, the study educational study.
Your artistic career, for us to have a better understanding of its scope, how many times a year you play as a professional musician outside of the university as a performer? You have an idea?
It's difficult now because I started right before the pandemic.
Okay.
So there's 2 years of uncertainty.
Okay.
But I would say probably 100 performances outside a year. That seems about right, and that's pretty selective. When I lived in New York before, it's just a part of your kind of daily life. It's different in North Texas. I don't really play
there.
Very, very infrequently.
So you fly a lot?
I fly a lot, yeah. But when I was in New York, I would probably 300 times a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
300 times is like once a day.
Almost, yeah. But that's sort of out of necessity. But I send a lot more email. I send like 300 emails, a week. So that's better now because I'm teaching. But that takes place of those performances. But but I would say about 100, and that's seems about right.
And I know you have met already Portuguese jazz students and practitioners. How did you find them comparatively with the American students you have at university? Are they very different?
Well, I would say that the students who have spent time, this is not very many of them at the University of North Texas, but the students who have spent time in New York are different from students everywhere.
Okay.
And then students everywhere else are have many similarities. And the reason why I make that discernment is because in New York, if you're a musician and I play with you, and then I see you a month later, we've both played with 200 other people, and so there's so much input and activity that it's just like this source of energy that doesn't exist anywhere else. And so things, I feel like, develop slower in other places. But with that being said, I mean, my students at North Texas, they all are very eager to learn, and they do the work that's required of them, and they practice. You know, it's like they do the things that are necessary, and so far it seems, at least the 2 days that I've been here, everybody does what I tell them to do.
Okay.
maybe if I stay longer, you know, it doesn't work like that. But
that's nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Here in Portugal, we don't have such market for jazz professionals, but I think you can't compare with the United States. So here, the main venues for jazz sometimes are festivals, which are a weekend or 3 or 4 days, in which many musicians can present their practices and their music. How about is it at the United States? I understood that there's a big difference between New York and the rest. Maybe with difference in New Orleans or something like that because of their historical tradition and so on. But in North Texas, for instance, are there many places to a professional musician, jazz musician play?
Yeah, well, the thing is,
you can find work almost every week or every day.
I would say in general, like all my students are working.
Oh.
In jazz, I'm not all of them are like playing every week, playing jazz, but they use those skills, whether it's like, even if it's just like a band for a corporate event or a wedding or something. But then where North Texas is, it's about 25-30 minutes from Dallas, and Dallas has a huge gospel music scene. It's I mean, there's an amazing amount of musicians that grew and came out of the black churches in Dallas, and so you know that music has such a tremendous impact, has had such a tremendous impact on jazz in America, Black American music. It's coming from Black spiritual music. That's really where it originates. So so I don't know if you would call that, we wouldn't necessarily categorize that as jazz, but it's coming, it has the same mother. And so for that reason, there's a tremendous amount of that kind of that spirit and that energy that's in that community and that affects that community. And for that reason, that's one of the things that I think is special about the area. You know, it's special about the music that's available.
Okay. I think Susana wants also to make a question.
Yes, I have a question for you. We have here in Portugal a problem with women in jazz. We don't have women in jazz. Very few.
You know what's funny?
Majority are men. So what is the situation in the United States, and how do you see this difference?
Actually, I don't know how it is outside of the school, but since being here and rehearsing in the band, and I know it's like a slightly unconventional instrumentation for the jazz orchestra here, right? There's like flutes and clarinets and strings, but I was thinking just yesterday that I was like, man, how did they get so many women into jazz? Yeah, like you know, a lot of times there's this association with women in jazz being vocalists, and here I've noticed there's a lot more instrumentalists, at least that I see on like the professional level. What I have noticed is there's a lot more support for non-male instrumentalists in jazz, especially in the last 5 years. Like it's a huge surge of support. And at the same time, I'm seeing a tremendous amount of young 16, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-olds who sound incredible, like female jazz musicians who are instrumentalists, guitar, trumpet, or bass, or drum. And so I think we're turning a corner on that.
Okay.
And I think it's just about having a generation see people older than them and know that, oh, there's a path to do this. And so being able to navigate through any type of adversity because they've seen that it's already been done. So, but other than that, I was going to ask you the same question. Yeah.
Well, we're near the end of our Teeny Talk Lab, but we have a question from the audience. Can you tell us?
Yes, we have a question from the YouTube channel. What do you have already tasted from the Portuguese jazz scene? Or maybe the European jazz scene, may I add?
What have I tasted?
Well,
Tasted.
Yeah.
Yeah, you understood the.
Yeah, they're like
It's a
how.
kind of synesthetic question,
Yeah.
mixing tastes with
Yeah.
philosophical appreciation
Yeah.
or something like
Well,
that.
the thing is when right, like European countries have a lot of, like, they revere culture and history because there is a lot of culture and history that they're proud of. In America, there's not a lot of culture and history that we're proud of, and or that we should be proud of, right? There's a lot. It's kind of, America has been was developed on the exploitation of other people and is in many ways still that. So what, music in America, like Black American music, jazz was social. Like people come out there, it would be an event, and then Europeans were like, whoa, we have these like people like Charlie Parker. They're people of that nature, that genius. They're like, these are living artists, absolute geniuses who are doing this in the moment. We'll sit here and watch you and do nothing else because we value it so much. And that was that I think is, and that reverence for the action of what's happening and the mastery of the art is something that I feel when I come to Portugal or come to Europe in general. Like Spain, Portugal, France, Italy, there's just this appreciation for the cultural aspect that you don't get in America. And so that's the thing that I taste the most.
Okay.
That's been the most beneficial to see because it just feels, you get so much more out of it, and it helps you to give more. And sometimes we travel 24 hours to play for 45 minutes. So that those things are very, very valuable and necessary.
But I have a last question, I think, which I would like you to tell us what can we listen in the concert tonight. But I would like to ask you this from a point of view. You just talked about, let's say, the heritage, cultural heritage or historical heritage that we value here in Europe. And I don't know why you don't pose yourself with the same values, let's say like that, on the American songbook, because the standards, the jazz standards are also an heritage, old and historical and so on. But my question is, how do you pose yourself as a jazz artist, as a more classical or traditional jazz musician, or more contemporary one? Although I don't know how to say to making a new path on jazz, on contemporary jazz. I would like to use a Portuguese word that I can't translate to the English. rasgar,
Bro,
to,
bro,
how
Bro
do you
paddings.
do you broad the tradition, the American tradition, as a jazz artist, or you are more conventional jazz artist, as Wynton Marsalis or something like all those big artists,
Well,
which are very root.
I mean, if you look at so just as an example, if you look at someone like Wynton Marsalis, he said he made a decision because he was a modern. Well, first of all, we're all modern because
Yeah.
I'm saying the most recent words, right?
Yes.
I can't help but be modern, right? Because I'm alive right now,
Yeah.
and things have happened before me. So, so like in the case of Wynton Marsalis, he said, the classical world is valued, and they have a lot of support and financial support, and how can I create that with jazz so that it's revered the same way that classical music is, classical music, whatever that means.
Yes.
And so he made a decision because he was doing much more like non-conventional or non-traditional. He was playing a lot more non-conventional music or non-traditional music, and then he made a decision. He said, "I know that I have to create this environment that people can measure, so that it gets valued."
Okay.
And so for something like that, like an example, in the example of Wynton
Yes.
Marsalis, I think that's a decision that he made for the betterment of the whole
Jazz scene.
yeah, the whole scene, and for the future, I think it's a tremendous effort that he put forth. There's a lot of people that disagree. He was very vocal, and that's fine when he was younger. But for me, I have no choice but to be modern because I'm here now, but I don't exist without everything that came before me,
Okay.
and some of the things I'm aware of, and some of the things I'm not yet aware of, and as researchers, like I'm curious how you research because the more I develop as a musician, the more aware I become of what I don't know, and the more I teach, the more I understand that there's ways that there's little corners of an answer that I haven't discovered yet that would help me be a better teacher for my students and for me, and then be a better performer, be a better colleague, all that. So, so to answer your question, modern.
Tonight we'll listen to good American jazz and modern jazz. Let's say like that.
Sounds good.
So who is your inspiration?
Wow. Well, so
In jazz, of course.
Miles was my first. Miles
Okay.
Davis. There's so many. I mean, Clifford
Okay.
Brown, Freddie Hubbard, Chet Baker, Lee Morgan, Wynton Marsalis, Terrence Blanchard, Nicholas Spade. I mean, those are just some trumpet players.
Constellation of
Oh yeah, it's
stars.
all of them. Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you very much for being here.
My pleasure.
Thank you both for participating, Susana Sardo and Philip Dizack. We also thank the support of the United States Embassy in Lisbon. See you in Campus Jazz, the University of Aveiro Jazz Festival on stage in Aveiro until June 24th. Thank you. Wow.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, thank you.